Hello and welcome to episode 73 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark, and coming up on today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Scott Mosier. And you're probably thinking, hang on a minute Mark, he was only on a couple of episodes back. And you know what? You're right, he was. But it was also my most downloaded episode I've ever released since I've started podcasting. So it was stupid for me not to follow it up with a second part. And that's what I'm here to do today. So like I said, on today's episode you're going to get more of Scott Mosier. Now in true typical Mark and Me fashion, I like to touch base and talk about the last episode, and I was joined by the incredible musician and vocalist William Duval from Alice in Chains, and we talked all about his brand new solo album, One Alone. That episode was great. I had some great response. So many people were tweeting and Facebooking and emailing me saying how much they enjoyed it, and since have gone and listened to his debut album and fell in love with it, and they've just realised that it's absolutely awesome. And as I said on the last episode, it's easily a contender for my album of the year. But let's talk about today's episode. It doesn't need a big introduction. It's Scott Mosier, and he's back for more. So let's get straight to it. So Scott, thanks for coming back for part 2 of Mark and Me podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
Obviously last time we spoke about everything apart from your directing in the brand new film The Grinch, so I wanted to spend some time today talking more about the animation side of your career. We know you have a great relationship with Kevin Smith, and what I wanted to start with is what you learnt from him in the kind of early stages of his career and your own in the way of becoming a director yourself.
Look, I was really fortunate, and I think I was fortunate, and then I got to sort of make movies and also observe somebody like Kevin directing movies. You know, his work, you know, watching him work with actors and also watching how he worked with actors sort of evolve. You know, I was able to be front and center and see, and I give him a lot of credit because he's the one who, you know, it's kind of like he's the one who went through the door first. So He's the one who had to, you know, be there, be 22 years old, 23 years old, and sort of taking on all these responsibilities and dealing with all that sort of, dealing with the actors and the performances and the personalities. And I was dealing with them in the background, but, you know, there is a whole art to doing it while you're on set and sort of building a relationship and building a trust with an actor. And that I got to really watch and observe and absorb through watching him. And, you know, I think the other things is we're very similar and then we're different. So, you know, I got the benefit of like making movies with him and watching him direct and being able to observe the process and go like, oh, that seems like I got to sort of cherry pick and say like, oh, that's great. Like, and then there's other, like I would do that way. But then there's other things where I'm like, yeah, like I'm a little bit more inclined to do it another way just because of personality. I mean, I think the idea of directing is like there is no sort of one way to do it. I mean, you know, everybody's kind of doing the same thing, but the process and the means by which you do it, I think you can sort of tailor make to, you know, your personality and your strengths. It's hard to pinpoint it. It's like I was with him for so long. It wasn't like I had one movie. It was like, hey, you can go make one movie with Kevin. And I felt this sort of, okay, I got to absorb as much as I could. It was like we worked for so long together that I think that the benefit of watching him direct and what I learned from it is like, you know, it's immeasurable. I can't really point to exact things because, you know, I got to experience so much of it. And also, I mean, part of it was like I got to grow up. You know, I was, you know, we were both young. You know, admittedly, I don't think I was ready at 22 years old. I think I had the desire, but I don't think I had I don't think I had the vision.
No.
You know, I think that was the big thing. You know, you walk away with Kevin where, you know, like his movies or don't like his movies, like his comedy, don't like his comedy, like think whatever you want. It's like, he was making the movies he wanted to make, and he had a specific vision, whether you like it or not. You know, when people have specific visions, that is when you generally you can get those diverse reactions, you know, because you are putting something in front of people that's distinct. And so, people will sort of react that way. But, watching him sort of from early on, like, he kind of made, in a weird way, like, when our careers started, I think, I didn't sit down and write this down, but I think I was observing somebody who was like, oh, this is, like, there's stages you have to get to. You have to, you have to find a voice and a vision. Otherwise, it's like, it's not that you can't do the job, it's just that your ability to function in that role is way harder, because as you're answering a endless amount of questions from people, if you don't know what it is, it's like you're just gonna talk bullshit.
Yeah.
You're just gonna like blab on and on about like, or you're just gonna be pointing things out of the air, and look, this happens all the time. I mean, people, and I think you can see it in movies where it doesn't necessarily have a voice. But, I think that's a big part of, I learned so much and was given the opportunity to sort of like grow and learn and sort of observe things. And then, over time, I sort of settled into a space of like, oh, this is the kind of stories I want to tell, and this is what I want to do.
You said at 22 you probably weren't ready, and you didn't have the focus or the kind of the experience. You were quite young, and I suppose, did it help seeing the rise of Kevin's career after Clerks, but also the experience of the roller coaster journey of Mallrats bombing and stuff? Was that the best way to learn for you, and then shape your knowledge that now you know what to expect when things don't go to plan?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was like, it was the best of both worlds, which was, I got to work with Kevin. I got to learn how to make movies and work in the business. I got on the job training, and because Clerks had sort of taken off, part of learning in this business is access. Like, where are you sitting? What do you have access to? What are your experiences? If you're, being a PA is great. It's like, if you get a PA job and that's how you get in the business, and you take what you can get. I was fortunate where it's like I got to skip all that, and then I got to be a producer, so I got to be in the room. I got to be by the monitor. I had access to I had access to different people. And so having that access, being in that position, it just, it accelerates your learning curve, just because your experiences you're right there. You're in situations where you can really, if you're paying attention, you can absorb a lot.
Yeah.
I also worked like crazy, and part of that process after Clerks was just like really being like, okay, how do you make movies? Because making Clerks, it wasn't like we didn't know how to make a movie. It was like we knew the bare minimum, and we executed the bare minimum of how to get a movie done based on our knowledge. And I think that's part of the charm of that movie. But after that, my big thing was like, well, how do you do, like, especially if I'm going to work in the business, like, now I want to absorb and understand how you really make movies from front to back, and sort of immerse myself in different things. Like I think it was around Dogma, where I suddenly was like, really got more focused on sound.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, like, what does everybody do in the mix stage? And that was the first movie we went to Skywalker, and there were some great people there who were patient. And I was like, and we kept doing test screenings, so we were there doing temp mixes all the time. And so I just started going like, well, what's that person do? And what's that person do? What does it mean to be a dialogue editor? Like, what do you really do? And so, yeah, I mean, after Clerks, it was like I was just trying to absorb and understand as much as I could about the different parts. And I guess curiosity has always sort of fueled me a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is partially, like, I think animation was a byproduct of that. A sense of, like, well, how do you do it that way? Like, I wasn't like, oh, I bet you it's 1,000% different. I was just like, I know enough that obviously enough of making live action movies obviously it's not so different that I'll walk in there and just be completely confused. But I also was like, but there has to be, the way it's broken down and the stages of it are different. And I was just curious. And part of it was like watching, it was like the golden age of DVDs where it's just like watching behind the scenes on Toy Story and watching process videos and stuff like that. All that stuff sort of got me really intrigued and interested.
It's quite depressing, isn't it, now? Because those sort of DVDs, the directors and the filmmakers would spend a lot of time on the extras, and I used to love buying like a 2-disc edition for basically the extras, and now all you get is a trailer or a commentary, but it was those behind-the-scenes documentaries that was worthwhile as the disc itself, and they seem to be dying out now. You don't get as much knowledge.
Yeah, it was like, I remember because, the way I could kind of track it is like, I remember I had friends who basically built businesses. It became such a big thing, and then people sort of built businesses around generating that content. Like, that's how big it was for a period of time. When the DVD sales started really dropping, then, the budgets for those things went in the toilet, and basically, I don't know what it was. I don't know maybe there's statistics on how, generally speaking, the consumer didn't give a shit, or the average consumer. Maybe they figured out that, if we put that shit on, or if we don't, it sells the same amount of DVDs, so why spend the money?
Yeah.
I don't know the reason why, but I definitely, unless there's, Criterion is obviously still maintaining that. And so I think there's an audience for it, but maybe what happened is there just wasn't a big enough audience.
I think the majority of your audience are in a stage where they'll just buy it knowing it's just a film and a trailer, and they're absolutely fine with that. And there's probably, for every 10,000 of them, there's 1 or 2 Mark and Scotts that want to watch the making of and behind the scenes and how the animation was done, and no one else really gives a shit, which is just the sad, depressing fact of it.
I mean, it's like, on one level, over time, like, I appreciate the fact that I appreciate, and I think coming to an agreement with the fact that, not every, some people just watch it, and enjoy it. And the majority of people do that. And the majority of people are doing that because, they have lives. They work all the time. They do all kinds of things. Like, I feel like, and maybe there's maybe not as much, but I do feel like as somebody who's really into films or sort of, studying it, or et cetera, I do feel like we are serviced, maybe not as much as we were in the past, but I do think that for people who want to know more, in general, you have the means to find that stuff out. But to me, like, the audience is like, the fact that a bunch of people just watch it and then go home, I think it's good to come to terms with that,
Yeah.
And always understand that like, anytime you make something, it's like, the people who love it or hate it are generally the people who are, probably more passionate about movies. And so they're more passionate about their reaction and their opinions of it. And then I think there's a bunch of people that are just like, they'll watch a movie and you'll be like, hey, what'd you think? And they're like, yeah. It's like, they don't, but they're just sort of like, it just kind of washed over them. And it's not like I want to talk, those people that call me up and tell me that every day about any films I made, where it's like, oh man, I was so indifferent. Like, I don't even know why I watched it. Like, you don't want to have that experience, but I think understanding that, just knowing that, like, look, there's people who love it, there's people who hate it, there's people who just like, there's people who it just doesn't really enter their sort of consciousness at all. That sucks, but it's just like, it's a reality. There's nothing you can do. I mean, every movie I don't know who can name a movie that basically, like, everyone loves it. There's always somebody who hates it. There's always somebody who loves it, and there's always somebody who, like, is just like, meh.
Yeah.
It's like, I every single movie, because there are movies that I'd be like, that's the fucking worst movie in the world. Like, I can't believe that's such a piece of shit. And then you'd be like, if you search, you'd probably find somebody who's like got a prize copy. They're like, I love that shit. Like, somebody, you know, or maybe not. Maybe some people wouldn't. But I feel like weirdly there's an audience for everything. Because you see movies all the time where you just go like, who the fuck's watching this shit? And you're like, somebody is.
You're talking to someone that loves Mac and Me, so it's quite a difficult one.
Yeah, you love Mac and Me, and it's like
the biggest piece of shit ever, but I love it.
Yeah, and I know other people who love it too, and they're attached to it in a way that I go like, what the fuck? I was like, I don't know, like I just sort of turn it off. But there's like, you know, there's movies that I remember, like when Death to Smoochie came out. It was like this Danny DeVito movie, and I remember going to the theater with Brian Johnson, and we were alone. I mean, there's like 5 people in there, and like I was like, I loved it. I haven't watched it since, so maybe I'd watch it again and be like, yeah. But I remember playing like I loved it, and then I just remember everybody else going like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I like The Room. Everyone slags it off, but I like The Room. I think it's the way that Tommy Wiseau went for that and kind of followed it through and did everything he could, even though it's shit. I love him, and I think fair play to the guy for doing it. And you couldn't get Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, J.J. Abrams. No one could recreate that magic in that film.
I have not, you know, I'll admit, like I have not seen The Room. I do have like bad movies for whatever reason. Watching bad movies, sort of. I think I used to do it a little bit more when I was younger, but then it sort of just exited my body where I just am like, I can't, like, there's too many things out there, and I'm like, I can't, for some reason, I can't appreciate it. I'm like, I mean, I guess I could watch that thing and go like, wow, I can't appreciate, maybe I could, maybe I should try, but I'm very guarded with my time, and so I see things where it's like, oh my God, it's so bad, you have to see it. I'm like, yeah, but like, when people come up to me, and if somebody takes a bite of something and their face looks like they just bit into dog shit, I'm like, and they're like, oh my God, and then they want you to try it. I'm like, I don't want to try it. Like,
yeah.
And movies sometimes I get the same way where I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't necessarily get I did a little bit more when I was younger, but now I get kind of guarded against watching things. And I admit, like, I feel bad, but I also don't feel bad because I'm like, if somebody's watching a movie that I made and they don't like it and they turn it off, I'm like, it's fine. Like, that's what, like, at a certain point, they're movies. We get to make choices. But if I start watching it, I used to watch everything, and I used to watch it all the way through. I always used to be like, well, I'll get something from it. And maybe I just got to the age where I'm like, you know, I've done that so much, and I've proved that's not true.
Yeah, and I suppose for those 2 hours you spend watching that terrible film that's awful, you could have watched something that's bloody decent, and hopefully you got something from.
I used to watch it over and over again. Like, I remember Kevin and I would always, like, it was always like, what'd you watch? And it was like, oh, I'd put on this movie, and, like, you know, I watched Fight Club 40 times, and
yeah,
like, there's a list of movies that I'd watch again and again and again. And then that was another thing that I just kind of was like, I mean, maybe twice I watch things, but maybe a couple movies a year I'll watch again. But that second viewing really sort of puts it to bed for me. Like, I don't feel the need to, I mean, it could be because I absorb everything quicker. I do think after 25 years or 30, I guess, what I would say is, like, I guess 30 years of intensive movie watching and just watching movies all the time, like, my pleasure now is more like, well, I'd rather see something new and see what happens, you know? I'd rather throw on something that I'm like, well, even if it's like something where I'm like, I'm not really that interested, but I'm like, why does everybody like this movie? And I'll throw it on. And maybe I won't sit through it, but I at least veer towards starting something new than I do to sort of like rewatch Jaws, which I love Jaws. I think Jaws is amazing, but I also am like, I don't know how many more times I can watch it. And it's that thing where I'm like, I'm not sure how many more times to watch it because I'm not sure what I'm going to gain from it at that point. Like,
yeah. That's fair.
Yeah, I'm more selective about my experience, or what I want my experience to be. Making movies and watching movies has sort of evolved over time.
And you're more sacred with your time, aren't you? I think that's the big point here. You don't want to go and watch Jaws 10 times when you could watch 9 brand new films that you might switch off, but at least they're brand new experiences, and one of those could become your favourite film.
Yeah, and, part of it's probably mortality.
Yeah.
I'm 48. I'll be 48 in a month, and which is, look, it's not that old, but there is a tipping point of aging where you suddenly look at everything and go I'm not gaining more life at this point. So when I look at something like Jaws, I'm like, I don't know, when I was 20, I didn't, you never thought about, you don't think about time. You don't think about ever running out of time. And now I'm and now I do. Now I go I can't watch this movie. I can do anything. I could write my friend a letter. I don't actually need to sit down and watch the same movie for the 10th time. I've already squeezed so much joy out of Jaws. There's only so much I can gain from it. It's funny, what I tend to do now more is when you're flipping through things and suddenly something's on TV or something's on a channel, and sometimes I'll get engaged. Godfather 2 was on the other day. I was flipping through, and it was the sort of prelude to the scene where Michael's going to shoot the cop and the guy in the restaurant. It's just such a great scene, and I was just close enough that I just left it on for 20 minutes. And then I sort of moved on from it. So I find myself observing moments, or even searching them out. So if I'm rewatching things, it's very specific, where I'm I want to rewatch that scene for a specific reason. Versus I feel like we used to just watch, or I used to watch movies over and over and over again as a form of osmosis, where it's if I just keep blasting these movies into my brain, I'll slowly just start to absorb more material, which, is probably true on some level.
If on iTunes it keeps track of how many times you've listened to a song, if someone kept a track of your life, what would be your most viewed film of all time?
More than anything. I remember watching Fight Club a lot.
Yeah.
I was really sort of taken by that whole thing. It felt like there was a lot to unpack. I've watched Raiders of the Lost Ark a lot.
Yeah.
That was a big one when I was growing up. I mean, it's funny, everybody, for whatever reason, whenever everyone, every Christmas, somehow we end up watching Die Hard.
The ultimate Christmas film, to be fair.
Which is the ultimate Christmas movie, but it's also an incredibly well-made movie. It's a really well sort of structured movie with great performances. It's a really good movie. But it is also it's a weird Christmas tradition. So I probably watch that a lot. I'm trying to think what else. Those are probably the ones that are up there. Nothing leaps out as I go oh shit, I've watched that movie a million times. I mean, I watched some of the Star Wars movies probably quite a bit, but not as much as Fight Club and stuff like that.
So about 25 minutes ago, I wanted to talk to you about animation, and we talked about the extras on Toy Story, which is a good introduction for you, and probably got your love, and that's probably what shaped your taste for animation. But was there stuff before that growing up that you watched? Was it anime, or was it some of the Studio Ghibli films, or was it more of the Disney classics? But what was the thing that kind of gripped you and made your love for animation so strong now?
I was doing an interview for the home video release of Grinch, and I was somebody kind of asked me that, and what was weird is the first example. I mean, I used to watch Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
That was a big part of growing up, and I watched all that stuff. It sort of isn't pure animated film, but it almost occurs to me as one, is Tron.
Oh, nice. The 80s classic.
Yeah, the original had a big impact on me. Just the sort of it was pretty amazing, the sort of internal, or the world that they built and what it looked like. I remember that having a big impression on me at the time. And this is when I was pretty young. That was one of the things I remember first as far as a film. And then I was definitely more live action. Animation was, I started going to school around the time that all the sort of Disney came back alive with The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, and I went and saw all those. I was definitely I went and started checking those out. I'd seen a lot of the classics, on video and stuff. But I definitely I remember seeing Toy Story and being pretty excited by that. I was sort of really oh, wow, that's awesome. But the one that really, I would say the one that pushed everything over the edge, the one that definitively made me go oh, I want to do this, was The Incredibles. That was the one where I was at a screening with Kevin somewhere at the Pacific Design Center. I don't know how we got in there. We got invited to something. And I just remember leaving there and going oh man, that's I want to do that. I'd liked other animated movies. I enjoyed Finding Nemo and I was curious, but The Incredibles was the one that pushed me over the edge. Because for me, when I saw it, I was oh, this has been a great live action movie. It felt a little more, it was pushing to me a little bit out of animation and more into live action. Or kind of, it was blurring the line a little bit. I mean, Brad Bird's the one who's just animation isn't a genre. It's just a way to tell a story, a way to make a movie, and I really agree with that. And I think that I think his animated films communicate that. I mean, The Iron Giant, The Incredibles, and then he made The Incredibles, and then suddenly Ratatouille came out, and that was a big. I thought that was an incredible sort of movie also, so well crafted and so well made and so well thought out, and pushing the boundaries of what what an animated movie is. And so that really got me in my headspace of oh, I really want to do this. And then I guess I just sort of once I sort of found that connection to it, I was look, if I could do anything, that's what I would do. And I remember, kind of when Zack and Miri was ending, or around there, when we were finishing that movie, and I told Kevin, I was oh, I'm gonna take a break. I was I had no idea how I was gonna get into it, or if I could. It was a smaller business then than it is now. It would be easier to sort of get into the business now. I mean, at that point, it really was Pixar, DreamWorks. I don't even know if Illumination existed at that point. There wasn't as many opportunities there were today. And so, I just sort of, I was also writing, so I was trying a few different things, but I was just putting it out there to the people I knew, that it was something that I wanted to pursue and something that I wanted to learn. And I'm friends with Aaron Warner. I befriended Aaron Warner, who produced all the Shrek movies, just through a mutual friend of mine her name's Laura Greenlee. She was the line producer on Mallrats. She did every movie Kevin and I did together except for except for Chasing Amy and Clerks. Otherwise, she line produced all the movies. So I met Aaron Warner through her, and we became friends, and he just sort of understood that it was something that I was interested in. And he ended up taking over or running a studio in Dallas called Real Effects. And they had been a vendor, so they'd been, sort of making other people's movies for a long time. And then they decided to make their own movies internally, and the first one was called Turkeys, which became Freebirds. And Aaron was like, I think I could really use a good creative producer on this. It wasn't at the beginning. It was kind of near. It was like probably 3 or 4 months before the movie went into production, and I didn't even totally understand what that meant. Like I was sitting down talking to him, and he was like, "This is where we're at." I kind of knew a little bit about the movie, but he's like, "If you come on, you'll learn everything." It's like baptism by fire, because the movie was happening quick. And so I kind of was, at the time I was writing and doing some other things and working on some documentaries. And I was like, yeah, this is it. Like I'd talked to my wife and I was like, this is it. Like this is, not like this is it, but more just like, yeah, I should do it. Like I should this is my chance to sort of learn on the job. Kind of like, working with Kevin, like being able to sort of earn a paycheck and learn all at the same time. And so I started Freebirds in I'm terrible with years. I guess it was like 7 years ago. So maybe it was like 2011.
Yep.
And, so I did that, and I was the creative producer, and it was exactly that. The schedule was really hard, but I did sort of get a chance to really. All the people around me were very nice and cool, and I got to kind of learn the whole process. And I was going to go to art school or film school. I was trying to pick between one or the other.
Yeah.
Because I always doodled and I loved drawing. I mean, I kind of left high school. My grades are and then I ended up at a community college down in California, and my grades sort of stayed meh. I always had a really hard time engaging in school. Classrooms for whatever reason, unless it's like a hyper-focused, trade schools are easier for me, things that are kind of more focused, but I never did that well in school. And I did 2 years of community college to try to get my grades up. And they were okay, but then I was really and then I was like, oh, I'm going to go to I need to focus on one thing or another. I think it was just that general education thing where I'm like, it's like general meetings. Like nowadays, you have to take general meetings. It's like, I don't know why, I just hate that word. Like doing anything that's just like, oh, it's just a general thing. It's like, I don't know how to, I guess in my mind I always wants to be like, well, why don't we do something specific? And because that'll result in something. Because if you do something in general, it'll get you a sort of general result.
That's a good point, and I just try and think now, every day I always get people at work and stuff like, we'll just have a general chat, we'll just have a general catch-up. I'm like, oh, okay, what's the point?
Yeah, I'm like, what does that mean? It's like, if you want to, it's like, just, if you want to have even if people would just, maybe it's semantics, I'm like, if you just said, like, hey, let's just have a conversation, and I'm like, okay, like, that's fine. But even then, I'm just like, I like applied learning, I like being able to, and I like stakes. I like when it's just like, well, you have to figure this out, or you have to do this, or someone's going to be upset, or someone's going to lose money, or something's going to happen. Like, education, for me, it was always hard. I was just like, so I get a good grade or a bad grade? I got good grades when I was a kid, and then I started to get some mediocre grades. And I was like, this sounds terrible. I hope my parents don't listen to it. But I was like, so all that really happens is, like, my parents were unhappy. And I was like, it's like it wasn't like their disappointment in me not getting great grades was like, it held water a little bit. And then I just was like, yeah, like, I guess I couldn't, it wasn't enough to motivate me. And so I just sort of lost. I couldn't get really attached to the idea of, like, getting really good grades. I couldn't stick to it. I just would, like, sort of. So, but art school and film school I just kept going back and forth and back and forth. and I was actually I was going to these like UCLA extension classes, like night classes about film script writing and stuff like that. I wasn't in the program because I couldn't get into UCLA because of my grades. But I was like, you know what, I should really focus, and I'll try to go to a trade school of either one so I can just do learning. And I was running around campus. I used to jog a lot then, and I was running up these stairs that are in the movie Gotcha with Anthony Edwards. They're like, I remember they were featured in that movie. And so I was running up the stairs, and it was nighttime. And when I got to the top of the stairs, there was like light. There was like it was really bright, and when my eyes sort of focused, they were shooting like a film school short or something. And I'm not that person who has like, oh my God, it was this huge sign. I know it sounds exactly like that, but I generally am not that. But it was enough to tip my. I was like, look, it's as good as reason as any to make a decision, you know.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going to film school, and then I didn't go to art school, and then I always loved drawing, and I loved being around artists, and so animation really was. I got exposed to that part of it. I mean, there's amazing painters, digital painters, like, you know, just the amount of artwork you generate trying to figure out and form ideas, and, you know, you have to make every single little thing in the movie. It's just incredible, you know, and the storyboard artist. And so I really, really enjoyed that part of the process. And you know, when you finally see a shot all lit and rendered after years of being, you know, an idea and then a scribble and then et cetera, is a really powerful experience. It's it takes a long time, but it's pretty incredible when you see a final shot. I mean, and in a weird way, it has to be. Otherwise, who the fuck would do it? It takes that long. It's a big part of what makes animation so attractive. You know, it's just when you see it all put together. But anyway, so I got on Freebirds, and I just jumped right in, and we started making that movie. And what I didn't know, you know, I guess I was old enough and had enough experience that what I didn't know I could sort of figure out on my own, and anything that was sort of technically outside of my understanding, I would either find out, you know. Part of it in filmmaking and in life is like, it's also important to figure out the things where it's like, you know what, like, I don't really need to know that. Like, I do think that needing, like, there are things where, like, people explain things like, you know what, like, for me to completely understand it would take so long, and it doesn't, and you know what, and even if I did understand it, it wouldn't necessarily change how this movie is going to get made. You know, there's enough people who understand it. So, like, especially technical things where it's like you get into a room and you go like, you know what, there's 5 people here who know so much about this stuff, and they do it all day long, and I don't know fuck all. And I'm like, at the end of a year, like, I'll never come close to knowing how much they know. And so, you know, I do think I sort of edit out the parts where I'm like, look, this is what I think I need to know because I think I can have a real effect. This I could know, but then it's more just for the sake of knowing. Yeah. And I'd rather read a book about, you know, I don't know, something different than learn every aspect of not just animation, but also, you know, just filmmaking. I mean, there's just some parts of it that I think are important, and some parts of it I don't.
It's like school. It's like school, though, isn't it? Like at school, they spent hours in maths teaching me about algebra. They spent ages teaching me how to speak German. I never fucking use any of that in my life now, and it just seems like I wish I could have filtered it out because I don't use half of it. It's never benefited me. Waste of my time, you know.
No, you know, it's funny. Like I think, I mean, I I think it's something that comes with age. I do think that there's an importance to exposure. When you're young, it's like I think when you're young, you should amass experience, and I think being exposed to different things that when you're young, like taking German becomes just like an exposure to learning new languages. And, your reaction to it might have been like, fuck, like, I don't care. But, like, somebody next to you is just like, they want to know 10 languages, and it starts them on some road. I mean, part of what you're doing when you're young, and I only say this in hindsight, is you're kind of like, you're running around just tasting everything and seeing what you like. I think as you get older, you still need to maintain that, and try to be open to things. But inside of, once you're inside of that thing, once you're inside of making a movie or like, oh, I'm gonna remodel my house, or I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna travel, or whatever. Once you're inside of the thing, that's where I think editing things out is helpful. And I am older now, and so there are some things that I just edit out where I'm like, there's just certain things where I'm like, I know I'm not going to enjoy that. And so, but I know I'm not going to enjoy it because I've experienced it.
Yeah.
That's what's really important, is just like, don't discount those things in the past, because they're there for everybody to assess what they enjoy and they don't enjoy. And you end up going like, I mean, it's funny because I was, of course, when you talk about languages, like for years growing up in Canada, I was like, I learned French. And then as soon as I didn't have to take it, mandatory French anymore, I was like, fuck it, I'm not doing it. And then I ended up taking a job in Paris. And, my response is like, God fucking damn it. Like I should have, quel foutoir. Like I should have fucking, like, I should have stuck with it because it would benefit me now. It was impossible for me to know that then. But exposing yourself to different things, I think, is really important, and sometimes more than once if you need to. But then there is a point as you age where I think you're running I mean, it's a thing. It's like I'm fucking running out of time. So if I've tried something twice and both time I thought I was balls, like I'm not doing it again. Otherwise I'm just an asshole.
This whole episode is about not wasting too much time and doing the same thing too often.
Exactly. Yeah. So then when so the movie Freebirds, and I finished it. It came out. I learned a ton, but I'll admit, like I was pretty tired, and so my opinion of continuing in animation was not 100%. I wasn't like, oh, fuck yeah, sign me up, I'm going to do it immediately again. I was like, I was like, there's lots of parts I loved about it. That's when I really was just like, I'm like, oh man, I really would love to be a director. I was internalizing, like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't keep, everyone's going to keep offering me producer jobs. And so I was trying to figure out how do I get myself into a director job. I was trying, and it wasn't there was no obvious sort of path to it. And then I was editing for like 6 months or so. I finished a movie that a friend of mine had started called No Escape with Owen. I don't know what it was called overseas, but it was like Owen Wilson, Lake Bell, and Pierce Brosnan. It was like a thriller that was really fun because I never worked on one, so it was a really great experience. The director and producer, the Dowdle brothers, had a great experience doing that. And then I did a documentary on Marvel called Pulp to Pop. It was like the first 75 years of Marvel. And that was really fun. And then while I was doing that, like I got an email from Chris Maladonnery, who runs Illumination. And Brian Lynch, who I had met in New Jersey, he kind of had come in to work on Chasing Amy, and we had stayed in touch. And he had been working at Illumination for years. He had written Hop and then he was in the process of writing Minions. And so he passed my name on to Chris Meledandri, and so then he called me, and I ended up meeting him. It was a general meeting, and so of course I was, almost didn't go because of my aversion to them. But I went, and then we started talking about, he ended up bringing up the Grinch, and I was super intrigued, and I really liked him, and I liked the studio, and so then I started as the producer. I was hired to be the producer. And while I was doing that, I ended up co-directing a short for the Sing DVD, the movie directed by Garth Jennings that came out a couple years before The Grinch. And so I did that with a layout artist, sort of the head of layout of Sing, a guy named Gilo. And we had a great time. And then, I'd always been sort of upfront with Chris about the fact that I wanted to direct, and that was my main focus, is to direct features. And then so they made some changes, and they pushed the movie a year. And Chris wanted to make some changes, and so he asked me to move up to being director, which wasn't like a huge leap, because as a creative producer on an animated movie, like, everybody's different, but for me it was like being really hands-on and being in the mix and being involved with everything that's going on and knowing all the major players. So when it did happen, it went pretty seamlessly, and I think Chris was able to have a sense of what I could do in that role after watching me sort of be the producer for a period of time.
Did you feel much pressure? Because that's quite a jump. I know you said the role duties and your kind of responsibilities in the role weren't too different, but you're then the director. You're so much more responsible. It's your name attached to it in a much bigger light. Did you feel like, Jesus, I really need to step up now, or were you just comfortable with the transition?
I wouldn't say I wasn't overwhelmed by it, but I was very aware. Mostly I was aware of, like, this is my opportunity, and I've worked a long time for it. And so my anxiety wasn't necessarily about how different or huge the difference was between the two jobs. It was more about, like, okay, now's my opportunity. There's certain things that I have to do that I felt totally comfortable with, and I had enough experience with, that didn't really worry me. And then there was a whole list of things where I was like, I don't have a ton of experience, but so I'm going to have to sort of step up and focus on those things, which is kind of how I looked at it. Which is when the transfer, when it happened and I got promoted, I was like, okay, well, what have I been doing that I have a wealth of experience in, and therefore that's not the thing I really need to focus on. Editorial, like, I've been an editor, I've sat in edit rooms, like, I didn't sit there and go, like, how am I going to be the director in the editing room? I had worked with storyboard artists on all the movies, so I kind of wasn't as, like, I didn't sort of go like, well, how am I going to communicate with board artists? So there was a list of things where I was like, I know how to do these things, and how I focus them might change a bit, because now I'm in a position where I'm the person sort of generating, or it's my job to either come up with the idea or help shape their idea. But there's certain things that I didn't feel intimidated by. And then there was things where I was like, I hadn't worked a lot with actors per se. It's not that I hadn't, but I hadn't just done it a lot. And, Benedict Cumberbatch is a super talented, very serious about his craft actor. And so that was like, and then we hired a young girl for Cindy Lou, who's like, I think she was 7 or 8 when we started. And so those are things where I was like, okay, this is where I got to like show up and sort of, do the prep and be ready to do it, because it is a big job. And so sitting down and going like, well, what do I know how to do that I can just sort of start jamming on, and what do I sort of not have a lot of experience in, and therefore preceding those moments of doing records with actors or other stuff, doing my due diligence and sort of doing prep. I was ready to do those things of which I had less experience. But because I prepped myself and just sort of, did the work, I could at least sort of, I was able to sort of bridge the gap, and sort of those few initial sessions of recording with actors and stuff, I had to sort of discover exactly the way was best for me to work with each of them, and also sort of push myself when there were times where I was like, oh, like, well, now you got to be, like with the little girl, I was just like, oh, you have to be way more energetic. Like, I was like, I know she's a kid, and for me to just kind of sit around and sort of talk with my slow drawl and not sort of bring a more sort of energetic, focused version of myself to the record, I knew wasn't going to work. Like, I had to sort of look at that and go like, well, in order to get the performance out of her, like, I'm going to have to come in there and try to match her energy and try to keep things fun and focused. So I was trying to really focus on the areas that I just didn't have the experience with. And by doing that, I just didn't necessarily, I felt pressure, but I didn't feel like, oh, fuck, like, what am I going to do?
So when it was all done, and obviously you spent, was it almost 6 years on this film, is that right?
4.
What was it like when it was actually all done, the blood, the sweat, everything had gone into it, and you were there watching it back, and it's your name now as the director? You must be so proud of yourself, and you don't need to worry about sounding arrogant. You must be thrilled that it's such a big release, and now it opens the door for you to now go on and hopefully do more and more animation, which is what you wanted to do after seeing The Incredibles. I
mean, yeah, I feel, what's funny is it's seeing my name and kind of watching the whole movie together, and it's a whole lot of, you experience a lot of different emotions. I feel proud, I feel happy. With every movie I've ever made, even when I'm not the director, I do have that tendency to be like, I wish I could change this. I wish I could change that. So in the freshness of the moment of sort of seeing it all put together, I still was like, I wish I could fix this or fix that. For me, seeing it all, seeing my name up there and seeing everything that's happened my reaction was much bigger than just, having worked on this movie. Like, it had the sort of weight of the last 25 years of sort of this weird circuitous route I took to get here, and all the work I did. And, it's funny, like, I had such a great time producing with Kevin, and that was such an amazing experience. And I remember I was like, oh, I'm gonna take off and try to do this. There of course was, I was nervous, I was scared. I was like, well, what if this doesn't work out? Like, it wasn't like I was leaving a burning building where I'm like, well, fuck, of course I'll be happier not inside of it. Like, I was like, I have a great career with a great friend making movies, and so once I left, I was like, oh, man, am I going to be like 5 or 6 years later, like, having gotten absolutely nowhere, and also in those 5 or 6 years missed the opportunity to have made different movies with Kevin. And so, so when I saw the movie and it was all there, I was like, there's a lot to unpack for me. It was a lot to sort of take in, and how I was feeling was there was just a lot going on, and it took me. It's been like and every time I've watched it and had different experiences and gone to the premiere and had the movie released out in the theaters, it's like, it's been my sort of reaction to it and how I feel has evolved, and because it's, I've reflected on so many things that have come before it and decisions and all the rest of it. So I feel awesome. Like, I feel great. I'm super happy and not content in the way where I'm done, but I feel like I sort of, there's a sense of having kind of, I'm trying to think of the best, because it's not like, oh, I climbed to my mountain and I'm done. Like, I don't necessarily feel that way, but I feel like I got to a ridge with a really fucking nice view.
Yeah.
And like, and the climb never ends. There's no sort of destination. It's always just about continuing to climb and find that next challenge. But I do, like, this moment has been like, sort of, I crested this ridge, been able to look down at this beautiful valley, which shows how I got there, which shows the trail or the path to where I ultimately was. So it's been a really impactful and big moment for a lot of reasons.
I'm really glad that now you're there, the view's so beautiful, and you can enjoy it before kind of looking up and thinking, where's the next ridge? How far? What's the next look going to be? It must be quite I wouldn't rush. I'd like to think that you'd sit there and enjoy the view a bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, look, I do think it's a conscious thing. You do have to. I remember when the movie was coming out, I was trying to be really conscious about how I experience it. Because at that point, like, look, it could be successful, it could not be successful. And so how you experience that is important. And so I was trying to be very sort of like, I was trying to manage my anxiety and just sort of be with it and be like, hey, like, it's going to do what it's going to do, and how I feel about how I've performed and what I've done leading up to this moment is as important. And part of it, I'm sure, is that I'm almost 48 and I've been doing this for 25 years. And, so I'm sure that's important because that also feeds into it. And yeah, I am enjoying it. And I think I have friends who are at Sundance right now with the movie, and I think it's the hardest thing to communicate and the most important thing, which is you have to, if you don't focus on how you experience success and failure, you just never look up, so you get to that ridge with the view, and then if you just keep climbing, you never get to experience that sense of accomplishment, regardless regardless of whether it was positive or negative in the sense of how people reacted to the movie or how much money the movie did. Like, you still have to, and this is true for all of life, which is we're generally not creatures that are good at, some people are really good at thinking everything they do is amazing, but I don't think the average person is a little less settled than that, and understanding and looking at everything you've done from the point of view of what you've done, and not like in comparison with everybody else, because if you do get to that point on the ridge, like, and you say like, oh, there's a view and I'm going to enjoy it, but it's like, if I don't, and I just look up and I see like, oh, there's people climbing higher than me, and if you make that your focus, which is like, oh, I got to try to catch up with them, like, that to me is then you're in a situation where you're going to be miserable all the time, because there's always going to be somebody climbing higher,
I didn't think we'd ever come to that at the end of this interview, but I really like that as an ender, that we're climbing mountains and we should enjoy the view more and not keep looking up and trying to chase those people because they're always going to be one step ahead.
Yeah, and because circumstance, it's like success isn't a zero-sum game. It's like there's a lot of circumstances involved. And so if somebody's, way ahead of you or you'll never catch them, or all those things, or if you make it a reflection of yourself, where it's like, well, it's because they're better, or et cetera, et cetera. It could be that they're working harder. There's different reasons why people are sort of ahead. It could just be that they're ahead, because they started 4 years earlier than you, and it's just like you're never going to close the distance. But when you if you could figure out to take the time to take a deep breath and look at where you've been and what you've accomplished, that's when you can. It's like taking a little moment of silence and I don't care what it is. It's like raising your kids. Like, if you don't ever sort of take a moment of reflection and sort of breathe in everything that you've accomplished, if you don't have that moment of reflection, it'll affect how you move forward, because you might change how you climb. You might climb slightly in a different direction. You might want to leap off onto a whole other, you might want to move over to a whole other mountain. Like, if you don't sort of take that time to focus, then you're just scurrying about, and as you get older, it's like, I think it's important to make sure that the reason and your motivation of why you're doing this stuff is still there, and still comes from the right place.
And that you enjoy it.
And that you enjoyed
the climb, because otherwise you're going to keep looking down thinking, what's the fucking point? Yeah,
it's and I say all of this having been having done all versions of it, like I've just kept climbing and not in, like, I say that because I've done the opposite, and sort of, and not been able to enjoy moments of accomplishment because I was just trying to jump onto the next one, like before the first one's over, you're sort of super focused on reaching that next plateau or that next sort of viewpoint, and or the sort of even sicker, crazy belief, which is like that you're close to the top and that you can actually reach it. All those things can sort of mess you up as far as enjoying and experiencing all the hard work, sort of the fruits of your labor.
I reckon we leave it there, Scott. I think that's spot on.
Excellent.
So there it is. There's my second part of my interview with Scott Mosier, and for me, I think it even tops the first part. What a great guest. I think overall now you've had nearly 3 hours of audio from him, so I hope you've all enjoyed it just as much as I have. A huge thank you to Scott for giving me all that time. We talked off air for a good hour as well, so I really do appreciate it. And as always, guys, if you want to listen to more of Mark and me, they're all available now on iTunes, they're on Podomatic, and they're also on Spotify. You can go on markandme.com, there's links there to my Twitter, my Instagram, and my Facebook page, and also my Patreon. My Patreon is growing, and I'm making sure that there's some incredible prizes up for grabs to say thank you for all the support. This month there's signed items, there's movie memorabilia, I'm getting vinyls, I'm getting pop figures, there's absolutely loads of different stuff, so you can go on there, and I think it's as little as 40p a month if you want to support me, and you can't even get a bag of hula hoops for that, and don't even think you can pay someone to feed you them at that price either. So yeah, it's an absolute bargain to be a Patreon for Mark and me. Thanks again, everyone, for supporting the podcast. I'll be back in a week's time with a huge episode. It's a great one, but you know by now I'll never reveal the guest. You need to stay tuned on social media, see the clues, and work it out for yourself. But until then, stay safe, and I'll speak to you all soon.